Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar. Again, my name is Tim Szuhaj. I am the Legal Research Analyst at SIA for the Americas. So it's my pleasure to moderate this webinar today, covering the legislative updates and how changes in Washington are impacting the staffing industry. As many of you probably are aware, just looking at your iPhone and reading the news at a minimum, that there's been a number of changes that have come from this new administration. With the passing of the Big Beautiful Bill Act, there are bound to be more adjustments in business all over that must be taken. Staffing is no different. Legislative changes coming out of our Capitol are impacting our industry, and it's hard to keep up with most of them. It's like drinking from a fire hose. They come out every day. A couple other reminders that none of the panelists, including me, I am a lawyer, are giving legal advice, okay? This is information. Also, the opinions expressed here are based on the factual information that we're getting. We don't take a side on whether a policy is good or bad. We will only highlight how it has perhaps changed from the past and how it is going to impact the future. So with that said, a couple logistics, questions may be submitted anytime, but we're going to reserve those to the end of the session. You can do so by clicking on the three dots at the lower right hand of your screen, and we will again address those during the Q&A. Also for audio, you can listen on your computer. If you want to change audio, click audio options and switch the audio. And if you need assistance, you can go through the Q&A section or email our member services at SIA. Quick shout out to some of the products that we do carry. A quick reminder about SIA: we make the world of work better. We inform, connect, and elevate the workforce solutions ecosystem, and we are the global advisor for staffing workplace solutions. This webinar is open to everyone. However, just a reminder that only SIA members will have access to the SIA research that is mentioned today. Our vast range of events, research, and editorial products from staffing firms and buyer members are laser focused specifically on staffing and solutions. As an SIA member, you enjoy access to SIA's objective research and analyst editorial publications, advisory services, event discounts to CCWP certification courses, and conferences. Speaking of conferences, here's our next upcoming conferences. The biggest one is the Healthcare Staffing Summit, which is going to be in November. It's a very rich with information. It does give extensive staffing research, targeted content focused on healthcare staffing, of course, next level networking opportunities, elevated thought leadership. So come out and be inspired by leaders and experts who are transforming the field. So that is coming up in November. I wish it was April. Showcase your team. In an era where job satisfaction is closely tied to feeling valued, the best workplaces go beyond financial incentives. Whereas personalized gifts or early out days, these companies understand that small gestures create lasting impacts. By being nominated underscores an important truth. Companies that invest in their employees, even in challenging times, come out ahead. Whether through open communication, career development, or simple thank you, these businesses prove that success isn't just about navigating economic turbulence. It's about building a workplace where people genuinely want to be. So nominate your company early. We have several opportunities for these, so feel free to nominate. It goes a long way with keeping your employees happy. Here are our speakers today. It is my pleasure and honor to be joined by them. I've introduced myself, but let me introduce Sarah and Mike. Sarah Faye Pierce is the head of government relations at Paychex, a leading provider of integrated human capital management solutions, where she leads the company's strategy and advocacy efforts on Capitol Hill. She serves as the strategic advisor to the executive leadership team and implements critical government relations advocacy to pursue innovative policy solutions. With more than 2 decades of experience, she has distinguished her career by holding leadership roles in government relations for Fortune 500 companies, as well as national and international trade associations. Most recently, she was the Senior Director of Government Relations for Kimberly-Clark, where she served as the head lobbyist for North American brands before the U.S. Congress and 50 legislatures on issues affecting the enterprise and business units. She devotes her free time to counseling professional women seeking to hone their advocacy and strategic capabilities. She's currently mentoring Ukrainian political advocates to combat misinformation campaigns. Additionally, she donates her time to coaching children from underserved communities at the Washington Nationals Youth Baseball Academy. So welcome, Sarah. We're also joined by Mike Brew. Mike joined Advanced Partners in 2021, having spent the previous 16 years in leadership roles at Advance's parent company, Paychex. Mike comes with tons of experience helping entrepreneurs grow, having seen what helped his mid-market and enterprise level clients at Paychex become successful. In his current role as Director of Revenue and Operations, he has continued to share that perspective and has played a vital role in helping Advanced Partners staffing firm clients grow. So welcome to our panelists. It is my pleasure. What we're going to cover today is what's coming out of Congress, what's coming out of the administration, and then we'll have Q&A, and then we'll talk about some SIA resources. It seems like we only have two topics, but they're enormous. And compared to the way laws and executive orders rolled out in the past, this is an exponential sea change in the sheer number and volume and velocity, how quickly they're coming. So it is a lot happening. I joke when I do these seminars that when we're done, something may have changed in the interim. And I said that as a joke once, and it actually happened. So a couple thoughts from our research that there are compliance headwinds. And you can see from our latest staffing industry forecast from September just came out that everybody in the ecosystem is experiencing levels of client caution due to policy uncertainty. So as things keep moving this quickly, people are trying to get their compliance game on par, but it's hard to do with so many changes. And we're seeing that in our research. Legislative, even though this article was about the impact of governmental actions and DEI, the polling that showed up in it is staffing firms or everybody in the staffing ecosystem is concerned about, the changes in the law, executive orders, and artificial intelligence. So that the legislation is being awaited to give some clarity on where we're moving. And lastly, compliance headwinds, the rise of the executive order. Now, these numbers were through the 6-month period of the current Trump administration. They'll be updated in the North American Legal Update for Q2 or Q3 at the end of September. But I can tell you as of today, there is 205 executive orders that have been signed by President Trump, 51 memoranda, and 88 proclamations. And it's fun to see that through the first 100 days of his administration, Trump had signed more executive orders than the last 14 presidents combined, excluding the first Trump administration. And since then, I think it's climbed to 16 presidents, and it may be even higher. So that just shows you the pure volume of information that has to be sorted through for people to understand and make informed decisions. Okay, that brings us to Congress, and I am going to pass this on to the panel and start with Sarah.
Well, very good afternoon, and just a big thank you to the team today. Thank you, Tim. Mike and I are really thrilled at the opportunity to be here today to share some information with you. Our big goal is to bring as much clarity, I dare say certainty, but maybe a little more certainty to some of the things that are occurring here in Washington and even beyond. And I think the beauty of the presentation today is to have someone here in Washington who's on the ground and working and advancing these policies. But then you have Mike, who can really bring that real world, tangible business eye and angle to it. And so we can really talk strategically about how this information and how these decisions coming out of Washington can really help you really establish your business, take it to the next level, or just start thinking about opportunity and even risk a little bit differently. And while there's a lot here, we picked a smattering of hot topics that we find continue to come up within the staffing industry. And so, as we go through the presentation today, we just really want to home in on some of the things that are really being thought about critically out there and share the best information that we have with you today. And so with that, we would be remiss if we didn't start with that one big beautiful bill that President Trump signed there on July 4th. Where we had spent the first half of the year working very hard to craft legislation that would, number one, extend the 2017 Trump tax credits, which the first handful here I'll be speaking about. And then also try to, advance some new policy, and then also really protect some policies that are important from being included in the bill, maybe because they could represent a cost savings. And so we'll try to just tease the surface of what's in the one big beautiful bill. I call it OB3, which is the common reference here in Washington. So if I say OB3, I'm not talking about a sci-fi movie or Star Wars. It's really this bill. And again, just picking the real top important tax issues that were made permanent or left out of the bill. So with that, we'll start with the first here, the small business pass-through. This is called the 199 Cap A tax credit, or some of us know it as qualified business income deduction. So small businesses can benefit from this now, A, because it's permanent, so that B brings a lot of certainty to the table. But if you're a small business, you can claim a pass-through deduction if your income is up to $400,000, and it's a 20% deduction on your taxes. And so that was a holdover from the 2017 tax bill that was brought onto the table this year and then made permanent through this legislation. And so that's a really, really important benefit if you are a small business and you meet those permanent, those qualifications. There had been some debate about increasing that percentage cap from 20 to 23%. That didn't make it into the final bill. And I only raise it here this afternoon because there could be some potential tax legislation that comes back later this fall or this winter where Congress may consider some more tax-related legislation. And there are some in Congress who had really wanted to see that pass-through deduction bumped up to 23%. So stay tuned to that, and we will all keep you guys up to date. So moving on to the business deductions, I refer to these as the big three. These were three deductions that were allowed to lapse or revert to old policy that came out of those 2017 tax cuts that we keep referring to. So we've got research and development, we've got bonus depreciation, and interest expensing. And so if these aren't on your radar, just to give a few comments on how you might be thinking about these from the staffing perspective. And so the R&D is research and development. You can now do immediate deductions for any sort of investment that you would do around research and development. So if you're a company and you are considering innovating some type of technology or some type of tool, if it's a compliance tool, if it's a recruitment tool, or you're developing software, you can now take those investments and immediately deduct them. Next is bonus depreciation. And so on any qualifying property, you can, again, take your immediate deduction. And so thinking about, again, equipment, any technology that you might be leveraging, your facilities, for example, are things that you should be thinking about, maybe talking to your CPA, or if you're a client of Paychex or Advance, talking to your HRBPs to find out if that's something that can be utilized and leveraged for your business. Next is interest expensing. So again, this is a big one if you are managing your cash flow through different types of cash flow loan arrangements. You can immediately deduct the interest on those loans, and it can really support the development and the evolution of your business operations. So just going to take a breath there and just punt it over to Mike, because I think Mike can really share on how clients of Advance and beyond within the industry are interacting with their services to really better understand how some of these provisions can work for them. So Mike, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, Sarah, thank you. And great job. I appreciate you guys, you joining us. You always do a phenomenal job going through this. I think the biggest thing that we get asked, especially in the staffing front, is, to your point, what does this mean for us, right, as a staffing firm? And a lot of this is applicable to small, medium-sized businesses and certainly some of the businesses in the enterprise space. Staffing firms just want to make sure that they're optimizing and taking advantage of these benefits. Our advice is always just consult, right, whether it's a CPA, an accounting firm, someone that has knowledge, preferably of the staffing industry, but just of this information in general, is probably the easiest and best place to start. Although we are in a specialized market for sure, and there's definitely specialized players out there that do, that have staffing firms as a majority of their base, seeking that advice from someone who knows is absolutely, probably the best recommendation we can make. And to your point, making sure that as you do have those questions, you can always research, but and we know where Googling can take us. You definitely want to consult an expert to make sure that you are doing the best thing for your business, especially when there's changes, right? Because you don't want to just assume that or do what you've always been doing, because there could be legitimate things that you're missing out on for your business. And it could be money that you can reinvest in the business, reinvest in your people, reinvest in acquiring new businesses. So I think worst case scenario, you do want to make sure that you're consulting someone to make sure that you're doing the best thing for your company. I do think making sure that whatever system or application that your firm has in place is the most up to date as it can be. We do have some clients that are doing in-house processes or using antiquated systems, and our recommendation is absolutely, especially when there are changes like this going through Congress, what better time to reconsider what you're using, because you do want to make sure that you are as up to date as you possibly can be. Obviously, as you guys know, Tim and Sarah, you can always reference government sites, but those do often take time to update, and it could be not be updated until the end of the year, which puts you in an awkward position, especially when it comes time to file your annual or quarterly taxes. You're trying to push W-2s out the door, meeting certain deadlines. It can put your business in an awkward position. So but honestly, Sarah, to your point, those are the biggest things that we get asked is, what does this mean for me, right? And we're not in a position to dictate to them what they should do for the business. It really is making sure that they're provided with the best information possible, and it's pointing them in the right direction of knowledgeable people that can help support their business.
Right. Right. And I think the next no tax on tips and overtime, I think is a great segue for that, right? Because we, can look at these and on their face, maybe not the biggest deal for the staffing industry, but maybe those, again, kind of considering, how do you become a differentiator, in the market, in your industry, and really demonstrating sort of the focus on why no tax on tips and making sure there's awareness around that if you're, a staffing firm owner, to potential employees that you would bring in, and then also to your clients and how it might work for you. But we also, have a short term, so we're moving out of the land of permanence into the short-term opportunity here. So from 2025 through 2028, we have provisions for no tax on tipped wages and then no tax on overtime. And so, Treasury, the Treasury Department on Friday just came out with its guidance for no tax on tips. And they published, a number of what they call TTOC, which is Treasury Tipped Occupation Code, which are the occupations that you have to fall within in order to benefit from no tax on tips. The 2025 tax year is a little bit gray because there will be no W-2 form updates, right? And so it's going to be up to employers and employees, tipped employees, to fill out a new schedule schedule. It's called Schedule 1A to claim, the benefit there. And just to kind of be clear on, what the no tax does mean, it means no tax on your federal income tax. And so all other taxes do apply. So there is a little bit of tricky accounting there. And so again, having a staffing industry who's, has their thumbs right on the kind of the scale of, what's going on and how they can really, leverage these opportunities, not just to be more competitive, but to maybe provide better services to their clients, I think certainly, very important. The overtime, no tax on overtime, a little bit more complicated in terms of, what overtime is being counted. Is it just the 0.5 or is it all time over that time and a half? And we're waiting for regulations out of the Treasury Department. We were just over a meeting last week with Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy, Ken Keyes, and his staff indicated to us that they're going to take the most strict reading of the Fair Labor Standards Act when they're applying the law in terms of the no tax on overtime. So I think that's just kind of something to take note of as we're waiting for more rules and regulations coming out of Treasury. And then, of course, we have the paid leave credit here, which would be more of a benefit that, inside the staffing firm in terms of how you're supporting your employee population is really important. But just Mike, back on the no tax on tips and overtime, maybe a little kind of color on the differentiators that these could be.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things, and we were talking about this earlier, Sarah. I think from a knowledge standpoint, going back to what I was talking about earlier, and this just popped in my head, staffing I think is unique from the standpoint that there's still an awareness component, because as you mentioned, it's not all taxes, right? It's just the federal side. So, but when you see no tax on overtime or tips, like people aren't digging in to see it. So I think having that awareness, but then partnering with an organization or a CPA or payroll provider, what have you, that is educating you on that, making sure that you're following the rules, and making sure that when it does come time to produce W-2s and tax filings, that you're following the law is important, because you're a business owner. You have a million other things to worry about. And that's potentially the last thing, right, that you should be worrying about, and quite frankly need to be worrying about, right? Run your business, grow the revenue. Staffing is unique, though, in the sense that a lot of staffing firm owners are not always functional experts in the positions that they are staffing, right? And we've seen it even within our client base, that you could be great, you have a great client out there, and then all of a sudden, they refer you, or you come across someone that says, hey, I have 5 openings to fill in this spot, and you've never filled that type of role before. And maybe that role happens to be a tipped role, right? Or now all of a sudden it's introducing overtime, or maybe it's in another state, right? So this is probably more so than other industries. You're getting that exposure pretty quickly, and suddenly, I might add, to industries that you have no experience in, right? So even more critical for staffing to have a pulse on this, or be partnering with someone that does.
Absolutely.
And I, if I might, I agree with
please.
that position completely, that staffing is uniquely positioned to have to react and be nimble to react to the industries that they're serving. And I think that the summary of all of this is, in any big, beautiful new bill or act, OB3, there will be disconnects, because big bills like this don't usually tie all the loose ends up. So you do have to stay abreast of this, because some of those gaps are going to get filled in as we go forward. And I'm going to use this as a segue to throwing you a curveball. What is the independent IC standard at the federal level?
Yes, well, so independent workers, and Mike and I spoke before the webinar today to say we can't go down the rabbit hole, because he and I have been talking about independent workers for over a year now, and what an amazing and unique area. It's growing. W-2s, maybe the group is aware here this afternoon that they're on the decline. And, you've got one side of the pie for the W-2s going down, and then you've got the independent workforce is growing exponentially year over year. And if you take them in totality, they're almost 50% of the workforce. So that's the tinkerers, kind of moonlighters, the part-timers, and the full-timers. But pretty soon those full-timers are going to jettison and become, almost half of the workforce. And so it's certainly an area to be aware of. And I think, talking about those opportunities and risks again, Mike, right, where, how does a staffing firm look at independent workers and the independent workforce and look at it as a really unique service opportunity. At the same time, you have a lot going on here in Washington, and right now you have the House Education and the Workforce Committee, you've got the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, so we lovingly refer that as the HELP Committee, H-E-L-P. So, we've got a lot of legislation that has been introduced that will codify the definition of independent worker and also look at other arrangements that would allow for portable benefits for independent workers, so health care and retirement. There's some legislation that's been introduced by the chairman of the Senate Help Committee, Senator Cassidy, that would create and allow for independent workers to participate in a PEP. So that's a pooled employer plan, and that's a retirement style plan that companies like Paychex and others offer that allow very small companies to come together to pool resources and participate in a 401k type arrangement. So there's a lot going on here, and that's in just the legislature. Then, of course, as Tim alluded to, there are some regulations that are on the books, but very gray in terms of sort of what is the applicability there. President Biden's Department of Labor finalized some independent contractor rules that were a pretty significant departure from the rules from, again, the first Trump administration. And so now what you have is you have a department that has put the Trump DOL, put those Biden era regulations on hold. There's some significant litigation going on against the Biden era independent contractor rule, and therefore Department of Labor currently has said they won't be enforcing that rule. So there's a lot of kind of confusion in that space in terms of how you are identifying and defining what an independent worker is. But in the meantime, you have quite a proliferation of workers who want to work and be in the workforce, but they want to do it basically kind of on their own schedule and as they would like to determine, what works best for them and their schedule. What we know about them is that they need access to healthcare and retirement as their top one and two benefits, but there isn't really like the greatest place for them to turn for those services. And so, Mike, one of the things that we talk about is, how does staffing step in and maybe shift and adjust and really step into a whole new kind of ecosystem service model for workers who really kind of like to set their own schedule.
Yeah, and Sarah, I know I love the last line on here. Is it a threat or an opportunity? I happen to think it's a massive opportunity. And Tim, I know this was actually a big topic at Executive Forum on one of the panels. I happen to think the staffing industry is very uniquely positioned to help in regards to independent workers for three reasons. And I'll be quick because I know we want to get to some of the other things. I think it's the access to steady opportunities. Independent workers are not only the ones doing the work, but they're also the salespeople, right, for themselves. They have to go out there when they're done with that work and line up the next opportunity, right? Why not let the experts, the 390 that are on this call, who all they do is go out there and find opportunities and match up the talent to those opportunities. That's what they do. So let them do it, right? If the concern is giving up control, to your point, Sarah, being your own boss, the ability to say yes, no to jobs, that can still exist, I think, with the right agency or the right partner, right, out there. So I think there is a massive opportunity to still do that. I think on the administrative and compliance side, which you touched on, but find me an independent worker that says, I love dealing with contracts, invoicing, payment processing, tax holdings. I'm pretty sure that person's not out there. If they are, I mean, good luck to them, I guess. All stuff the staffing firm, right, would take on as a result of being the employer, right? And the independent worker offloads that. And then third, it's obviously the ability to get access to the benefits, right? The healthcare, the training, even potentially the long-term career that, maybe they do find that perfect fit from a permanent placement that they say, hey, you know what? Maybe this wasn't on my radar, but there is a long-term placement for me. But either way, they have access to the benefit, the retirement that they otherwise wouldn't have, right? Or they're waiting for Congress to put together something that is permanent for them. But even that is not guaranteed.
Well, and if I might remind our listeners or viewers that this is at the federal level. There's independent contractor tests at each state level. So even if you're complying at one, you still have to be mindful of what the compliance is in the places that you are operating business. So it's a patchwork for sure. I think that wraps up kind of what we're looking at Congress, and I'd like to shift the conversation to the weighty issues of executive orders and how to look through these and make heads or tails and inform business decisions. So we're going to go to executive orders, and particularly in immigration and how it's impacting the staffing industry.
Yes. So I can kick this one off, mix it up a little bit. So one of the topics I think that has seen a resurgence lately is the topic of immigration in particular. And I say resurgence because this perhaps, at least in my experience when talking with staffing firms, both our clients and non-clients when we were traveling around, I would say between the election and inauguration was immigration, and then obviously kind of seeing the resurgence lately. And this is completely independent of politics, to be perfectly honest, was immigration. So what we're going to do on this slide is we'll walk through at a high level, kind of these bullets here. But before we do that, I did want to kick it over to Sarah. As we were talking, and Tim, you alluded to, we've heard a ton about executive orders, right? Celebrated the 200th executive order. We're beyond that now. So Sarah, can you give the Mike Brew level elementary school explanation on what an executive order is for the audience? Because I'm guessing at least some people are like me and have no clue what an executive order is overall.
Mike, it almost sounded like an invitation to sing Schoolhouse Rocks, but
There you go.
We'll save everyone from that.
Thank you.
But no, first of all, I think is really interesting to note. President Trump has made history again. More executive orders than any president in U.S. history. So it's pretty significant what you see coming out of the administration. Trying to make sense and track it all is difficult for even people who do this like me, every day, all day long. And we have people who help us, put it into a pretty little tracker and kind of track what is being put out there. But, what is an executive order? Kind of very basic understanding is that it's a policy that is, issued by the president. It can be essentially a proclamation or a memorandum form. And while it's a policy of the president, is also during the term of the president, it is law. So it has the force and the effect of law. Generally, as we understand it, applies to administrative agencies. However, if you are an administrative agency and you're in, like Department of Homeland Security, and you're in charge with enforcing immigration orders, that is where sort of the lines become blurry, and it really bleeds into impact on the private sector. If you're a government contractor, same thing. Your contracts will be impacted and affected by executive orders. Now, once the term of the president expires, the incoming president and incoming administration has the ability to, and as we saw on day one with Trump 2.0, the first action he took was to rescind 75 executive orders issued by former President Biden. And so there's a little bit of a kind of a push-pull tug of war there from this perspective, but understand it to be policy of the president, force and effect of law until that president leaves office.
All right. Thanks.
And if I might put one caveat on that, the force and effect of law on the federal government,
Yes. Yeah.
reaching out to private entities and others is to be determined.
Yeah, absolutely. No, good point for sure.
Yeah.
All right. I'll take that. That I understood. So
All right,
I think that was a good elementary school definition for me. So if
And
I get it, I'm sure everybody else did. So, all right. So I'm going to go through these one line by line, and then Sarah. So I'll give kind of the perspective of what we're hearing from our clients, and then kick it to you for just, kind of your thoughts from your perspective. And Tim, certainly any, thoughts or feedback you have on any of these. So the talent and pipeline disruption, trying to keep it simple, I think at the highest level, our clients and partners are seeing the impacts just when it comes to finding qualified talent. Certainly you can look at this at the higher level technical roles, right, that require certifications, degrees, more in-depth training and experience. It's certainly taking longer to identify that talent. And then obviously the process to screen, right, and recruit, if you want to call it the courting period, from beginning to end, it's proving to take much longer than what was previously experienced. And you're seeing this at other levels too, right? Just you're having to go through, maybe it was taking 50 resumes to find a candidate before, now it's taking 150 resumes or more, right? So that really is, I think, where we're seeing the biggest disruption from a recruitment and talent pipeline, which obviously has effects on the recruiters, morale, et cetera. So it's forcing, the staffing owners to just think differently and approach things differently when it comes to motivating their team and approaching their customers and clients overall.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the kind of hooks in here for the executive orders, right? We've got restricted visa access, and then we've got suspensions on certain countries that are sort of known to have kind of higher refugee populations coming into the United States to seek asylum or to come in and then work as well. And so we've got 14161 and then 14163. And then, of course, the executive order that hit Friday and into the weekend was the new executive order on the H-1B visa access. And so, any new visa application under H-1B, so it is a new application, not current applications, they're not affected. There's a new $100,000 application fee that is attached to the H-1B. And so that's certainly significant and again affects that talent pipeline and our ability to recruit the best and the brightest to come into our workplace and help the business be successful. So it's just really about sort of, as Mike said, shrinking those talent pools and really how does that affect the overall strategy of the business.
Yeah. On the compliance and onboarding side, understanding what exactly the staffing firm is and is not responsible for. This has come up on multiple conversations, Sarah, that you and I have had in other webinars that we've gone through. It's really the question from the staffing firm owner's perspective, what am I responsible for? What am I not responsible for? Right? It's, part of this is what we were talking about earlier, making sure that they do have a partner or someone that they can go to and help offer them that firm compliance guidance, right? Where do I draw the line? Obviously, the staffing firms don't own the site where, in most cases, don't own the site where the employees are. So if there is an on-site inspection, if someone happens to come out on-site and is inspecting the workers, what role does the staffing firm owner play? So that really is where we're seeing a bulk of those questions come in, and it really is looking for the clarification, with respect to I-9s and other questions that we're seeing come up the most often.
Yep, absolutely. And it's, that's 14159. So that's really getting into those workplace, audits, workplace investigations, where you're having actual DHS agents, come into the workplace and conduct the audit, right? And so that purity and that pristine documentation, becomes increasingly important. I think, Mike, it's a good time to remind people we're not attorneys and we're not giving compliance advice, but to also just, remember to really rely on this issue more than any on your external resources who are advising and supporting your business to make sure that you have every I dotted, every T crossed, and every, part of, I-9, E-Verify, however a process you use, it's really, really tight and has been scrubbed and reviewed very carefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, Tim, were you saying something? Sorry if you're muted.
I guess that means have every I-9 dotted.
Yes.
Very true. On the regional enforcement and client sensitivities, again, good tie into the last bullet. It's really not only might businesses stop operating in certain areas completely, which obviously has a direct impact on the staffing firms because those are their clients, right? Which would mean they lose a client altogether, they lose those placements. But even if those businesses stay operational, it's finding the talent becomes that much harder, right? The recruiters are having to work, that much harder, scan more resumes to fill the same number of orders. And even then, the risk of no-shows we've heard is increasing. Some of this is depending on the state that they're operating in. We've seen increases in California, Texas, Florida, and in some ways it's a no-win situation, right, for the staffing firms, which completely separate conversation, but is causing those staffing firm owners to have to think differently, right? Approach their businesses differently. How are they going to generate new business, make up for potential lost revenue? But that really is where we're seeing a lot of the questions, the feedback, the comments with respect to the regional enforcement and the client sensitivities popping up.
Yeah, and I think I would just, say here again, because it's very similar to the previous bullet, is like the cities that have the highest concentration of, foreign-born work, but also from a rural perspective is, again, you're in these industries, whether it's agriculture, if it's food service, there's been a lot of back and forth in terms of, what is the position of the administration on, those industries and how should they be handled, and should there be any, special dispensation or consideration for, those occupation areas. So again, having pristine documentation, having pristine process in place can give you that confidence. But I think another thing that, Mike hit on is in a case where, you're having, reviews of the workplace and there might be some removal or some question is that, what is your process from a staffing firm if you have someone on site and there's an incident where this comes up? And so I think there's another consideration that, is needed with your advisors to understand, what are the guardrails for the staffing firm and what are the actions that the firm will take, in certain situations, just to make sure that, the needs of the worker are being met, as well as the staffing firm being in full compliance with the law.
Yep, 100%. The next one, very similar to the above, with respect to detainment risk or worker availability. If a worker is for some reason, let's just say unavailable, right, and not able to fill a shift, obviously the staffing firm has to jump on it immediately. They have to fill that vacancy. Otherwise, they run the risk of reputational damage, to be quite honest, right? They run the risk of potentially losing the contract. So it puts that much more stress on the recruiters, the staffing firm owners. Obviously goes without saying, and not to skip, but it ties into the market strategy adjustment too. It's causing business owners on the staffing side to just think differently. How am I going to maybe have that list of candidates out there that we can call on in a more on-demand situation, that on-call, situation, because we do run the risk of no-call, no-shows for whatever reason, right? Maybe we don't even know why that they didn't show up on that site that day, right? Whether it be fear of, or maybe there was a situation where, they were detained for some reason. So again, tying into the last few bullets that we've been talking about, Sarah, very real, challenges that firms have come across in recent months.
Yeah, and I agree. We're seeing it with our customers as well, our members, and what they're asking about. What I would, and not to move off this important topic, but I want to leave time to talk about artificial intelligence, a hot button issue, and the staffing ecosystem. It's all the chatter. So why don't you give us the lay of the land with respect to legislation and regulating artificial intelligence?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll kick this one off at, again, super high level, and then kick it over to Sarah and you, Tim, because I know we've had some discussions on this. I think from our perspective on the staffing side, where we see this come up the most current state is a lot of clients and staffing firms looking into AI-assisted technologies. Initially, we were seeing this come up as a way for staffing firms to automate and reduce overhead, right, as a way to just drive efficiencies in the business. However, and again, this is just our perspective on the advanced partner side, we've seen a shift in regards to staffing firms looking to leverage AI-assisted technologies as a way to not necessarily cut heads, but to increase productivity on the recruitment side primarily, but the sales side, right? So if they can make their recruiters more effective and more efficient and get through more resumes, they can fill more orders, they can go out and win more contracts, right? And hopefully, obviously, drive revenue that way. And I say AI assisted very intentionally where I think there was some fear initially, and obviously this was prior to the current administration, but I think there was that fear out there initially by using AI technology and the risk of potential biases being in some of the recruitment tools, that they ran the risk of potential lawsuits if there were candidates hired and it was found later on that the technology they were using had some inherent biases built into that. Those concerns seem to have gone away recently, but a lot of the technologies that we're actually asked by a lot of our clients to sit in on demos with them are true AI assisted. So there's still that human portion required to, maybe it's producing the top 500 filtered resumes, it's consolidating resumes, pulling in from various sources. So it's allowing businesses and staffing firms to consolidate their tech stack. It's still leveraging the recruiter for the human interaction, the qualifying of the candidates. But we are definitely seeing that used a lot more on the assisted side to make productivity enhancements within the business.
Yeah, and I think on the policy front, this is again where, things are murky in the sense that, again, demarking activity at the federal level versus what's going on in the states. And there had been in Congress, particularly if we're going to revert back to a conversation on OB3, there had been a provision in OB3 that would have created a 10-year moratorium on the states advancing any rules or regulations policy on AI to really try to focus and harness the federal government in our effort to develop, innovative, cutting edge AI technology. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that provision was negotiated out. However, you have, leaders in this area like Senator Cruz on the Senate side, given his role on the Senate Commerce Committee, as well as Brett Guthrie, who is the chairman of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which are the two committees on the Hill that have primary jurisdiction over most of the AI policy. Of course, many other committees have jurisdiction as well. But there's been a commitment to bring that back, and we're already starting to see some of that policy that kind of got left on the cutting room floor with regard to AI resurge here now as Congress is coming back to work and really trying to refocus on what's next to come after the government gets funded, of course. And so, you've got, dozens and dozens of bills being introduced on the Hill. Hearing after hearing is occurring. I mean, there were just 8 hearings on AI just last week. And so there's an incredible amount that is going on, but we don't necessarily have sort of a certain path forward on, what some overarching AI policy is going to be. And so I think there's a big question mark from a policy perspective, which I think can make it challenging in the private sector, I think specifically for staffing, but I think from, technology and innovation, the tech sector, continues, full steam ahead. But I think as we're, really trying to kind of understand where the guardrails are here with AI, I think the questions become where you see, Mike, you've seen some pretty big tech CEOs talk about how AI could eliminate across the board kind of those entry-level white-collar jobs, and like what in terms of sort of reskilling or reorienting that, part of the workforce, is staffing, again, the industry that leads the way. And so I think there's some really important questions that are being asked while there's kind of an absence of certainty from a public policy perspective.
Yeah, I think the only thing to add to that, Sarah, you bring up a good point, and I know we want to save time for questions, Tim. I do think businesses, as this evolves, and where staffing can play a tremendous role in this, is businesses are going to be looking for talent that is what I would call AI ready, right? So they're going to be looking for folks that are either capable of working with the technology, right, are maybe able to work on AI adoption projects, able to come in and train staff on that technology, right? So these could be temporary assignments, short-term projects. And then many roles are still going to require, the human capabilities, the creativity, the leadership aspect, the problem-solving skills, all of these things that AI is not capable of doing at this point, which, hopefully not anytime soon, because all of us are capable of doing that. So that's where, if you are a staffing firm that is looking big picture and looking to pivot and continue to differentiate yourself, that's where the opportunities, I believe, are going to continue to exist. And if you're staying on top of it, then absolutely, I think that's the biggest opportunity for staffing going forward.
And if I might, that this echoes the theme that we've been discussing the whole time, that the regulation is up in the air, legislation is up in the air, and you just have to be mindful when we're hearing from our constituents that you may have contradictory directives on doing different things. Like real quick, at the EEOC level, they, in 2023, it came out that you had to use disparate impact testing to make sure that the algorithm in your AI recruiting tool wasn't inadvertently discriminating. And then the administration came up with the executive order, said no disparate impact testing should be used by the federal government. Now the EEOC is like, I don't know what to do. They're cross purposes. They're trying to work it out now, but you can see that there are bugs in the system that have to be worked out as we go forward. Any other thoughts on AI before we move to questions? Hearing none, I will move on. Okay, time for questions, and we have quite a few. And I'll go back to some of the OB3 discussion. Question is what is the responsibility for reporting the overtime amount to employees on W-2s in 2025?
Right. So we're still awaiting guidance. But as I understand, I was just looking at that this morning, the guidance that was put out by the Treasury Department on Friday afternoon has a new form. It's called 1A, and that is, as I understand it, the form that you would be reporting for 2025 tips and overtime if you're an employee. And what I've read so far and kind of seen coming across the ticker tapes, if you will, is that more instruction and clarity is needed. So I would just say stay tuned, but I would revert back to that guidance, and perhaps we'll work through the SIA and just share a link where you can access that and have a look at that form. But as I'm understanding it, current state, it needs a little bit more direction for both the employer and the employees.
So stay tuned. Next question. What is the impact of OB3 on the WOTC program?
That was, yeah, we didn't get to that. We went a little long on that first slide. There's just a lot to cover, but the Work Opportunity Tax Credit is what WOTC stands for. Very important tax credit to staffing industry, but also to support different sectors of the workforce. It expires at the end of 2025, so December 31. And there was a real drive to include a extension in OB3. It did not make it into the final bill. And so again, as I had alluded to, there is contemplation during the remainder of this year to advance another tax bill. I think the question is it a reconciliation bill, or is it a tax administration bill, or is it an extenders bill, which are all fancy names for new tax bills that we talk about here in Washington. And so I think that's the question. But the first question that has to be answered is, we run out of government funding on, I think, Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, and there's no agreement on the table. And the Senate voted down two different continuing resolutions on Friday before they left town for the Jewish high holidays this week. And so we're going to have a showdown on Monday and Tuesday when members are returning. So that's kind of the bigger question on the table for the moment, but there is a real increased sense of urgency to make sure we get an extension for WOTC.
Okay, we have another question. This one, going to immigration, with the H-1B visa fees being implemented, going up, isn't it just going to push companies to use offshore or nearshore resources to provide the same services? And is there any proposed legislation directed at use of offshore or nearshore providers?
That is a very complex question for an occurrence that just happened over the weekend. I mean, I think it remains to be seen. I mean, I think the question that was posed to us before we hopped on live here was, will this be rolled back? Is it possible that this could change as well? We've seen a lot of, if it's, trade policy and some other areas, there has been a little bit of a shift in terms of, what the policy of the administration actually is. And some have thought that that's a negotiating tactic, which has proven out to be decently effective. So I just think it remains to be seen in the next kind of coming days and weeks what's going to happen with this new fee. As I said, it's for new applications only. Certainly, we understand that the president's view is that he wants, talent to be sourced in the United States and close to home, so we can continue to innovate and advance our economy. But I think the question is like where are we tapping into that? And I think that's an unanswered question. To date. So I don't really have a good answer here. So I do apologize for that, but it's early days.
It is indeed early days, and I think that's all the time we have for questions right now. I'd like to really thank our panelists and point out some SIA research resources that give research and information on these topics. And you can see that there's a whole series of these that you can choose from myself and other colleagues. I'd like to thank our sponsor and thought leaders, Advanced Partners. I thank you for your time and the abundant information with the caveat that everything is changing, and stay tuned for further information. I'd like to thank you, and for everyone's benefit, that there is an audio recording that will be distributed to all attendees within 48 hours, and you'll be able to get copies of the slides through that. A little bit about SAA, but what I'd like to do is thank our panel today and for our attendees, and we look forward to hearing more from you later as these policies and legislation work their way through to more clarity for the staffing industry. So thank you once again, and with that, I will exit the floor. So thank you.
Thank you, Tim.